The morning started like any other Tuesday in Judge Helen Rodriguez's courtroom. She had been handling family court cases for over 20 years, and today's schedule looked pretty routine. 3 divorce cases, 2 custody hearings, and a few minor disputes. Nothing too complicated, or so she thought. The courthouse in downtown Denver was buzzing with its usual activity. Lawyers rushed through the hallways carrying thick folders. Families sat nervously on wooden benches, and court officers checked their watches, ready for another day of legal proceedings. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that familiar harsh glow that made everyone look a little tired. Judge Rodriguez adjusted her black robe and reviewed the morning's first case. It was a custody dispute between 2 parents who couldn't agree on anything. The father, Michael Thompson, was a successful real estate developer who owned several properties around the city. He drove expensive cars, wore tailored suits, and had hired one of the best family lawyers in town. His confidence was obvious the moment he walked into the courtroom. On the other side sat Rebecca Thompson, Michael's soon-to-be ex-wife. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept well in months. Her clothes were neat but clearly not expensive. She kept fidgeting with a small purse in her lap and glancing toward the door every few minutes. Rebecca had lost her job as a store manager 6 months earlier when the company downsized, and finding new work had been harder than expected. The case seemed straightforward from the paperwork. Michael wanted full custody of their 8-year-old daughter, Lily. He argued that Rebecca couldn't provide a stable home anymore since losing her job. His lawyer had prepared a strong case, showing Michael's steady income, his large house in a good neighborhood, and his ability to pay for private school and extracurricular activities. Rebecca's lawyer, on the other hand, was clearly overworked and underpaid. He shuffled through papers, looking for documents that should have been organized weeks ago. Rebecca couldn't afford the kind of legal representation that Michael had, and it showed. The whole situation felt unfair before it even began. Judge Rodriguez had seen cases like this hundreds of times. When parents divorce, money often becomes the deciding factor in custody battles, even when it shouldn't be. She tried her best to look beyond financial status and focus on what was truly best for the children involved. But sometimes the evidence made those decisions difficult. Michael's lawyer stood up first, presenting his case with smooth confidence. He talked about Michael's stable career, his beautiful home with a big backyard, and his plans to enroll Lily in the city's best private school. He showed photos of Michael at school events, coaching Lily's soccer team, and taking her on vacation to Disney World. Everything looked perfect on paper. The lawyer also made sure to point out Rebecca's recent struggles. He mentioned her unemployment, the small apartment she had moved into after separating from Michael, and her inability to maintain the lifestyle Lily was used to. He painted a picture of a mother who loved her daughter but simply couldn't provide the same opportunities that Michael could offer. When Rebecca's lawyer finally got his chance to speak, he did his best with what little he had. He talked about the strong bond between Rebecca and Lily, how Rebecca had been the primary caregiver throughout Lily's life, and how much time she spent helping with homework and attending school events. But without solid evidence or compelling arguments, his words felt weak against Michael's impressive presentation. Judge Rodriguez listened carefully to both sides, taking notes and asking occasional questions. She noticed how Michael answered every question with perfect confidence, always having the right response ready. He spoke about his love for Lily and his plans for her future, with the kind of rehearsed precision that came from expensive legal coaching. Rebecca, when asked to speak, was clearly nervous. Her voice shook as she talked about her daughter, but her emotions seemed genuine. She spoke about bedtime stories, helping with school projects, and knowing exactly what made Lily laugh or cry. Her love for her daughter was obvious, but in a courtroom where facts and finances often matter more than feelings, love didn't always carry enough weight. The morning dragged on with testimony from character witnesses, financial experts, and child welfare specialists. Everything seemed to favor Michael's case. His witnesses were well-dressed professionals who spoke glowingly about his character and parenting abilities. Rebecca's witnesses were fewer and less impressive: a neighbor, her sister, and Lily's former teacher who had to leave early for another appointment. As lunch approached, Judge Rodriguez was already forming her preliminary opinion. Based on the evidence presented, Michael appeared to be the more stable parent. He could provide better housing, education, and financial security for Lily. It wasn't the outcome she preferred emotionally, but legally, it seemed like the right decision. During the lunch break, Judge Rodriguez sat in her chambers reviewing her notes one more time. She had always prided herself on making decisions based on facts rather than feelings, but something about this case bothered her. Michael's presentation was almost too perfect, too rehearsed. In her experience, real life was messier than what she had seen that morning, but without concrete evidence of any problems, she couldn't let her gut feelings override the legal facts. Michael had a stable job, a good home, and the financial means to provide for Lily's future. Rebecca, despite her obvious love for her daughter, was struggling financially and couldn't offer the same level of security. The afternoon session was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock, and Judge Rodriguez expected to wrap up the case by 4. She would make her preliminary ruling, set up a visitation schedule, and move on to the next case on her docket. It was supposed to be just another routine custody hearing in a career full of difficult family decisions. The afternoon session began, exactly on time. Judge Rodriguez returned to her bench with a heavy heart, knowing she was about to make a decision that would change a little girl's life forever. The courtroom had the same people as before: Michael and his expensive lawyer on one side, Rebecca, and her overwhelmed attorney on the other. But something felt different in the air. Rebecca looked more anxious than she had that morning, constantly checking her phone and glancing toward the back of the courtroom. She whispered urgently to her lawyer, who just shrugged and shook his head. Whatever was bothering her, it wasn't something her legal team could help with. Michael, meanwhile, sat with the same confident posture he had maintained all day. He occasionally smiled at his lawyer, or nodded approvingly when favorable testimony was mentioned. Everything was going according to his plan, and he knew it. Victory was within reach. Judge Rodriguez called the court back to order and began reviewing the morning's testimony. She summarized both sides' arguments, noting Michael's financial stability and Rebecca's emotional connection with their daughter. The evidence was clear, and the decision seemed obvious, even if it didn't feel completely right. "Before I make my preliminary ruling," Judge Rodriguez announced, "I want to review one final time the evidence presented by both parties." She picked up her notes and began reading through the key points that would determine Lily's future. Michael's lawyer straightened his tie, already preparing his victory speech. Rebecca's lawyer gathered his papers, knowing the case was likely lost, but hoping for some last-minute miracle that never seemed to come in family court. That's when they heard it: a commotion in the hallway outside the courtroom. Voices were raised, someone was asking for directions, and footsteps were moving quickly down the corridor. Judge Rodriguez paused her review, slightly annoyed by the distraction. Courtrooms were supposed to be quiet, dignified places where serious decisions were made without interruption. The noise grew closer. A child's voice could be heard among the adult voices in the hallway, though the words weren't clear through the heavy wooden doors. Court security was probably dealing with a family who had gotten lost or confused about which courtroom they needed. Judge Rodriguez was about to continue when the courtroom doors suddenly burst open with a loud bang. The heavy wooden doors hit the walls with such force that everyone in the room jumped and turned to look. What they saw was completely unexpected. A small girl with long brown hair came running down the center aisle of the courtroom. She was maybe 8 years old, wearing a school uniform that was slightly wrinkled and shoes that squeaked against the polished floor. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders as she ran, and her face was flushed from exertion and emotion. Court security immediately moved to intercept her, but the girl was quick and determined. She dodged around the first officer and kept running toward the front of the courtroom. The second officer was closer to catching her, but something about her desperate urgency made him hesitate just long enough for her to slip past. "Stop right there," called out the bailiff, but the girl ignored him completely. She had one goal in mind, and nothing was going to stop her from reaching it. Her eyes were fixed on Judge Rodriguez with the kind of focused determination that only comes from absolute desperation. The courtroom erupted in confusion. Michael jumped to his feet, his face suddenly pale. Rebecca gasped and covered her mouth with both hands, recognizing the girl immediately. Lawyers from both sides stood up, unsure whether to object or just watch the unprecedented scene unfold. Judge Rodriguez raised her hand to stop the security officers from grabbing the child. In 20 years on the bench, she had never seen anything like this. Children weren't supposed to be in custody hearings unless specifically called as witnesses, and they certainly weren't supposed to come running into courtrooms uninvited. But something about the girl's face stopped Judge Rodriguez cold. This wasn't a prank or a case of mistaken identity. The child's eyes held a kind of desperate fear that you couldn't fake, the look of someone who had tried every other option and was down to their last hope. "Your Honor," the girl called out, her voice small but clear in the suddenly silent courtroom. "I need to tell you something important. Please, you have to listen to me." The entire room held its breath. Michael's confident demeanor had completely disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. Rebecca was crying now, though whether from relief or fear wasn't clear. The lawyers stood frozen, unsure how to handle a situation that wasn't covered in any law school textbook. Judge Rodriguez leaned forward in her chair, studying the frightened child who had just disrupted her courtroom. She had a feeling that whatever this little girl was about to say would change everything about the case she thought she understood. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Judge Rodriguez asked gently, her stern judicial voice replaced by the softer tone she used with her own grandchildren. The girl took a deep breath, wiping tears from her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm Lily Thompson," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "And I have something very important to tell you about my daddy." The moment Lily said her name, the entire courtroom seemed to freeze in time. Judge Rodriguez felt her heart skip a beat as she realized this was the very child whose future she had been deciding just moments earlier. The 8-year-old girl standing before her bench wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to know what was happening, and definitely wasn't supposed to be interrupting a legal proceeding. But here she was, small and scared, but incredibly brave, ready to speak her truth in a room full of adults who had been making decisions about her life without even asking what she wanted. Michael shot up from his chair so quickly that it almost fell over. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Children shouldn't be involved in these proceedings. She's been coached, influenced by her mother's emotional manipulation." His lawyer immediately joined in, demanding that Lily be removed from the courtroom and that any statements she might make be considered inadmissible. They argued that a child her age couldn't possibly understand the complexity of the situation, and that allowing her to speak would set a dangerous precedent. But Judge Rodriguez held up her hand for silence. She had been watching Michael's reaction carefully, and something about his desperate attempts to get Lily removed from the courtroom raised red flags. In her experience, innocent people didn't panic when children wanted to speak. They welcomed the chance to hear what their kids had to say. "How did you get here, Lily?" Judge Rodriguez asked, ignoring the lawyer's objections for the moment. She needed to understand how this child had managed to find her way to a courthouse and into a courtroom that was supposed to be restricted to adults only. Lily glanced nervously at her father, then back at the judge. "I was at school, but I heard Mom crying on the phone this morning before she dropped me off. She was talking to someone about court and about where I was going to live. I got scared and asked my teacher if I could call my mom." Her voice was getting steadier as she spoke, as if telling the truth was giving her strength. "When I called Mom, she was crying and said she might not be able to take care of me anymore. She said the judge was deciding today, and that Daddy might get to keep me all the time." Rebecca was sobbing quietly in her seat, covering her face with her hands. She had tried so hard to keep Lily out of the legal battle, to protect her from the stress and confusion of the divorce proceedings. But children were smarter than adults often gave them credit for, and Lily had figured out what was happening despite everyone's attempts to shield her. "So what did you do then?" Judge Rodriguez asked gently, leaning forward to hear better. "I told my teacher I felt sick and asked to go to the nurse. But instead, I went to the office and called a taxi with the emergency money Mom gave me. I told the driver to bring me to the courthouse because I had something important to tell the judge. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the sound of Rebecca's quiet crying. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, too caught up in the drama to maintain her professional detachment. Everyone was amazed by this little girl's determination and resourcefulness. Judge Rodriguez looked at Lily with a mixture of admiration and concern. "That was very brave of you, sweetheart, but also very dangerous. You shouldn't have left school without permission, and you definitely shouldn't have gotten in a taxi by yourself." Lily nodded, understanding that she had broken rules, but not caring about the consequences. "I know, but I had to come. I had to tell you something before you decided where I have to live." Michael was getting more agitated by the minute. He kept whispering urgently to his lawyer, who was frantically flipping through legal books looking for precedents or procedures that might get Lily removed from the courtroom. They both knew that whatever she was about to say could completely change the outcome of the case. Judge Rodriguez studied Lily's face carefully. The child was clearly frightened, but there was something else in her expression, a kind of desperate relief, as if she had been carrying a heavy secret for a long time and was finally getting the chance to share it. "Lily," Judge Rodriguez said slowly, "before you say anything else, I need you to understand something very important. This is a courtroom, which means everything you say here is very serious. You need to tell me the truth, even if the truth is scary or difficult to talk about." Lily nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of the moment better than many adults would have. "I promise to tell the truth, Your Honor. That's why I came here." The judge took a deep breath, knowing that whatever came next would likely change the entire direction of the custody case. She looked at Michael, whose face had gone completely white, then at Rebecca, who was watching her daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. "Okay, Lily," Judge Rodriguez said quietly. "What did you want to tell me?" Lily looked directly at the judge, then glanced quickly at her father before looking back. Her small hands were clenched into fists at her sides and her whole body was trembling slightly, but her voice when she finally spoke was clear and strong. "Daddy hurts me sometimes." The 4 words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Judge Rodriguez felt the blood drain from her face as the full impact of what the child had just said hit her. In 20 years of family court, she had heard many shocking revelations, but nothing had ever affected her quite like this. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Michael looked like he might faint, his earlier confidence completely gone. Rebecca gasped audibly, her hands flying to cover her mouth in shock and horror. The lawyers on both sides sat frozen, unsure how to respond to a revelation that changed everything. Judge Rodriguez gripped the edge of her bench, her mind racing as she realized how close she had come to making the worst mistake of her career. She had been about to award custody to a man who, according to his own daughter, was hurting her. The thought made her feel physically sick. The courtroom remained in stunned silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Judge Rodriguez stared at Lily, trying to process what she had just heard while fighting to maintain her professional composure. The 4 words the child had spoken changed everything, not just about the custody case, but about everything that had been presented that morning. Michael was the first to break the silence, his voice shaking with what sounded like panic disguised as outrage. "Your Honor, this is completely unacceptable. My daughter has obviously been coached by her mother to say these terrible things. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I've been talking about." He stood up, gesturing wildly as he spoke. Rebecca has clearly been filling Lily's head with lies to try to win this case. Children her age can't distinguish between reality and the stories adults tell them. This is parental alienation at its worst. His lawyer quickly joined in, demanding that Lily's statement be stricken from the record and that the court ignore what he called obvious fabrications designed to influence the outcome. They argued that allowing such testimony would encourage other parents to coach their children to make false accusations. But Judge Rodriguez was watching Lily's reaction to her father's words, and what she saw made her blood run cold. The little girl had stepped backward when Michael started shouting, her whole body tensing up like a small animal sensing danger. Her eyes never left her father's face, and the fear in them was absolutely genuine. "Lily," Judge Rodriguez said gently. Can you tell me more about what you mean when you say your daddy hurts you? Rebecca's lawyer finally found his voice and stood up. Your Honor, if we're going to continue with this line of questioning, I request that proper protocols be followed. This child needs to be interviewed by a trained professional in a safe environment, not interrogated in open court. Judge Rodriguez nodded, recognizing the wisdom in that suggestion, but she also knew that Lily had come here for a reason and deserved to be heard. I understand the concern, Counselor, but this child has taken extraordinary steps to be here today. I think we owe it to her to listen to what she has to say. She looked back at Lily, who was now crying quietly but seemed determined to continue. It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe here. Can you tell me what kind of hurting you mean? Lily wiped her nose with her sleeve and took a shaky breath. Sometimes when Daddy gets really angry, he grabs my arms really tight and shakes me. He leaves marks sometimes, but he always tells me they're from playing too rough or falling down. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Rebecca was sobbing openly now, covering her face with her hands. I knew something was wrong, she whispered to her lawyer. I kept asking Lily about bruises, but she always had explanations and Michael always backed up her stories. Michael's face had gone from pale to red with anger. This is absolutely ridiculous, he shouted. I have never hurt my daughter. Those bruises were from normal childhood activities, playground accidents, sports injuries, the kinds of things all kids get. But his protests were losing credibility with every word. Judge Rodriguez had been watching his body language carefully, and she recognized the signs of someone whose carefully constructed facade was crumbling. His earlier smooth confidence had been replaced by desperate aggression. Lily, Judge Rodriguez continued, has this happened more than once? The little girl nodded sadly. It happens when he drinks the special drinks from the brown bottles. He gets really mad about work or about Mom, and sometimes he forgets to be gentle. But then the next day he's really nice and buys me presents and says he's sorry. The pattern Lily described was textbook abuse, the cycle of violence followed by apologies and gifts, designed to keep the victim confused and silent. Judge Rodriguez had seen it countless times in domestic violence cases, but hearing it described by an 8-year-old made it even more heartbreaking. Have you ever told anyone about this before today? The judge asked. I tried to tell Mom once, but Daddy was right there, and he said I was just being dramatic because I was mad about them fighting. He said kids sometimes make up stories when they're upset about their parents getting divorced. Rebecca looked devastated. I remember that day, she said to her lawyer. Lily tried to tell me something, but Michael convinced me she was just acting out because of the divorce stress. He was so calm and reasonable about it that I believed him. Judge Rodriguez was beginning to see the full picture now. Michael had been systematically isolating and manipulating both Rebecca and Lily, using his charm and apparent stability to cover up his abusive behavior. His success in business and his confident demeanor had made it easy for him to discredit any concerns that might have been raised. The judge called for a brief recess and immediately ordered that Lily be taken to a safe room with a trained child advocate. She also called for an emergency investigation by Child Protective Services and requested that police officers be made available if needed. During the recess, Judge Rodriguez sat in her chambers feeling shaken to her core. She realized how close she had come to awarding custody to an abuser, something that would have haunted her for the rest of her career. The case had seemed so straightforward, successful father versus struggling mother, but appearances had been completely deceiving. When court resumed, Judge Rodriguez's entire approach had changed. She ordered an immediate temporary restraining order, preventing Michael from having any unsupervised contact with Lily until a full investigation could be completed. She also ordered emergency custody to be awarded to Rebecca, pending the outcome of the abuse investigation. Michael's lawyer tried desperately to object, arguing that his client's rights were being violated based on the unsubstantiated claims of a child. But Judge Rodriguez had heard enough. The fear in Lily's eyes, the consistency of her story, and Michael's suspicious behavior had convinced her that immediate action was necessary to protect the child. As the reality of the situation sank in, Michael's mask finally slipped completely. The charming, successful businessman facade disappeared, replaced by anger and desperation. His threats toward Rebecca and his attempts to intimidate Lily only confirmed what the judge now suspected about his true character. The investigation that followed Lily's brave revelation moved swiftly and thoroughly. Within hours of Judge Rodriguez's emergency order, Child Protective Services had interviewed Lily using specially trained professionals who knew how to speak with children about difficult topics. Their findings confirmed what everyone in the courtroom had begun to suspect. A medical examination revealed evidence of abuse that had been carefully hidden or explained away over months. Old injuries that had healed in ways consistent with Lily's testimony. Bruising patterns that matched grip marks and other signs that painted a clear picture of ongoing physical abuse. The evidence was undeniable. The investigation also uncovered something else that shocked everyone involved. Other parents from Lily's school came forward with stories about Michael's behavior at school events. They described incidents where they had seen him grab Lily roughly or speak to her in ways that made them uncomfortable, but they had hesitated to report it because he seemed like such a successful, respectable parent. Lily's teacher revealed that she had noticed changes in the little girl's behavior over the past year. Lily had become more withdrawn, anxious about going home, and sometimes flinched when adults moved too quickly near her. The teacher had considered reporting her concerns but had been unsure because Lily always had explanations for any injuries, and Michael was always so charming during parent conferences. Rebecca finally understood why Lily had sometimes seemed nervous around her father, why she had often been reluctant to spend weekends at his house, and why she had sometimes come home from visits quieter than usual. All the signs had been there, but Michael's manipulation had been so skillful that she had doubted her own instincts. The police investigation revealed even more disturbing information. Neighbors reported hearing shouting and crying from Michael's house on multiple occasions, though they had assumed it was just typical divorce-related stress. Security cameras from nearby businesses showed Michael grabbing Lily roughly by the arm as they walked to his car after one of their court-ordered visits. As the evidence mounted, Michael's legal team began preparing for criminal charges rather than just a custody battle. The man who had appeared so confident and successful in court was now facing the possibility of prison time for child abuse. His business reputation was destroyed, his social standing demolished, and his relationship with his daughter probably damaged beyond repair. Judge Rodriguez used this case as a turning point in her own career and in the family court system. She implemented new procedures requiring mandatory individual interviews with children in all custody cases, regardless of their age or the apparent straightforwardness of the case. She also pushed for additional training for court staff to recognize signs of abuse and manipulation. The judge often reflected on how different things might have been if Lily hadn't found the courage to speak up. She had been moments away from awarding custody to an abuser, a decision that could have put Lily in even greater danger. The thought still gave her nightmares sometimes, but it also motivated her to be more vigilant and thorough in all her future cases. Lily began therapy immediately to help her process the trauma she had experienced and to learn healthy ways of expressing her feelings. The therapy helped her understand that the abuse was never her fault and that speaking up had been the right thing to do, even though it was scary. Slowly, with professional help and her mother's support, she began to heal. Rebecca also received counseling to help her deal with the guilt of not recognizing the abuse sooner and to learn how to support Lily through her recovery. She realized that Michael's manipulation had affected her as well, making her doubt her own perceptions and instincts about her daughter's well-being. The case became a landmark example in family law circles, demonstrating the importance of listening to children's voices in custody proceedings. Legal professionals across the country began citing it as evidence for why children should always be given the opportunity to express their feelings about custody arrangements, regardless of their age. Lily's courage in disrupting that courtroom didn't just save her own life. It led to systemic changes that would protect countless other children in similar situations. Her 4 simple words, "Daddy hurts me sometimes," became a powerful reminder that children often know their own truth better than the adults who claim to be protecting them. Years later, as Lily grew into a confident teenager, she would sometimes think about that day in the courtroom. She remembered how scared she had been, how her hands had shaken as she ran down that aisle, and how her voice had trembled when she finally spoke her truth. But she also remembered the relief she felt when Judge Rodriguez, a national advocate for children's rights in family court. Rebecca rebuilt her life and career, eventually becoming a counselor who helped other parents recognize signs of abuse. And Lily learned that her voice mattered, that speaking up for herself was not only okay but necessary, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth even when it's scary. Michael served time in prison for child abuse and lost all parental rights. His business empire crumbled, and he became a cautionary tale about how appearances can be deceiving and how charm and success can hide the darkest secrets. The man who had seemed so perfect on paper had been revealed as the worst kind of predator, one who hurt the very person he was supposed to protect. The story of the little girl who disrupted a courtroom with 4 words became more than just a legal case. It became a reminder that children's voices matter, that the truth has power, and that sometimes the smallest person in the room has the most important thing to say.